Put down that remote, set your phaser to stun, and pick up that paperback.
You do have books in the 24th century.
Welcome to a supplemental edition of Reading Trek, a Star Trek book club podcast and proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Marty Ali, and I am joined by a guest host this week, Mr. Shashank Avvaru from Polytrek's podcast. Shashank, how are you doing tonight?
I'm great. I'm very, very excited that Reading Trek's finally coming back. We missed you. I missed listening to your wonderful voice. So I'm glad to be a part of this.
Yeah, it's been a while. We've kind of been hitting the once a month mark because of life issues that have been going on with, I've been moving to Long Beach and we're full steam ahead. We're getting back on schedule. We should be releasing more regular content now. But today we have a very special episode for you, and we'll get to that in just a second. But for those who are new to the podcast, we are a book club podcast. We're working our way through the Star Trek Expanded Universe one novel or comic book at a time, discussing the characters, plot writing, and artwork, and piecing it into the larger Trek universe as we pull out the meanings and messages of the text. This show is designed to give all fans a way to journey through the EU together, even if you haven't read the books. Before we get into the main topic for today's episode, we should let everyone know how they can get a hold of us. You can find Reading Trek on Twitter at ReadingTrek. You can find us online at readingtrek.thetricordertransmissions.com. And you can also donate to our Patreon fund if you are enjoying this show or any of the other Tricorder Transmissions Network shows by visiting patreon.com/thetricordertransmissions. You can also leave us a voicemail on the website as well by clicking on the SpeakPipe link on the right-hand side of your page. And Shashank, how can people get a hold of you later on if they'd like to continue the conversation?
People can find me babbling about politics, culture, and everything in between in Star Trek in a political podcast I do with my co-host Barry DeFord on the Tricorder Network called Polytreks. You can find us on Twitter on @Polytreks, POLITREKS. If people want to get in touch with me personally, I love talking about Star Trek, comics, anything nerdy. You can find me on Twitter on @Gutter_Hero, GUTTER_HERO.
Awesome. And you can find me personally hosting another show called Queer Trek. It's brand new on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. My co-host Heather Barker and myself, we talk about Star Trek from a queer perspective. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can follow that show at Queer Trek Pod on Twitter. You can also find me personally on Twitter at Time Travel Marty. All right, so now let's get into the main topic for today's episode. But I think, Shashank, you should be the one to introduce this wonderful topic since you are going to be the main host for this show.
It's very exciting to be co-hosting Reading Trek and just doing it solo. I got the high privilege of interviewing Mike Johnson, writer extraordinaire. He is often considered the most prolific Star Trek comic book writer, which makes sense because he has been writing them for about 10 years now. He started with a series called Star Trek Countdown, which came out in 2008, just a few months before the movie released, the first Kelvin movie. So he used to be on the production team of J.J. Abrams and Kurtzman, and he branched off from there into writing his comics. In this hour-long interview, I got to talk about his career with him. He tells us about his humble beginnings, his secret origins, if you will. We get into briefly his Star Trek Boldly Go series, which is what he wrote for the majority of the 10 years. And then we mainly discuss two comic book series that you and I reviewed on the show, Star Trek Discovery, Light of Kahless, and Succession. Those are both written by him. I got down and dirty in the weeds. I asked him the tough questions. I also did not let my fanboyism hide. So I don't know if he appreciated that or if he got creeped out by it, but he was like, how did he know that panel? And just all around good guy, very nice answers. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting, he's a writer. You expect writers to give a certain type of maybe shortened, maybe not that detailed answer, but he loved the discussions, he loved the undertones. And we also got to talk a little bit about his upcoming series, whose number 1 is actually out now, and we will do a full series review on Reading Trek, Star Trek versus Transformers. So lot of topics covered in that 1 hour interview, so go and enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, big props to Mr. Barry DeFord, who is the producer of this interview. So huge thanks to him for handling that task for us. And now we will turn it back to you, Shashank, and our guest for this episode, Mike Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special interview with, and I am just stealing from the people at STLV with this introduction, the most prolific Star Trek comic book writer in history. We are interviewing Mike Johnson today, specifically on 2 of his latest works that are out, both related to Discovery, Light of Kalis, and Succession. Mike has been writing IDW Comics in the Kelvin timeline. That I believe that's where he got his start. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. For the better part of, I think it's pretty close to 10 years now. Maybe or again, these are things he'll correct me on, but I do remember reading them right from when the IDW Kelvin line came out. And there was Boldly Go, then there was the Green Lantern crossover, and then it is Discovery. I'm sure I'm missing a couple, but enough from me. Hey, Mike, how are you today?
Hey, Shashank, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, you're right. It's been almost 10 years. It was 2008 when we started working on Star Trek Countdown, which was the prequel series for the first JJ movie, which became known as the Kelvinverse.
Okay, so there is Star Trek Countdown, and then there is Boldly Go.
That's right. There was a couple in between. We did Countdown, and then we did Countdown to Darkness, which was the prequel to Star Trek Into Darkness. And then in between there, we also did a 4-issue series that was just about Nero, and then a 4-issue series for Khan, Benedict Cumberbatch. We did a 4-issue series for him, and then we launched the main Star Trek IDW series, which went on for 60 issues. So it's wild. It goes really fast.
I've told you this before at STLV earlier this year, but the work that you guys are doing is extraordinary, and it's very much on par with the big two, and just quality-wise, art-wise, the way you guys have stepped up your game is incredible.
You. That's great to hear. I know, like, sometimes licensed comics get a bad rap, like they're not quote unquote real comics or something, but I approach it like I would any other series or character. And I mean, going back to when I was a kid, like I didn't really make a distinction between the traditional superhero comics and licensed comics. Like I loved the G.I. Joe and Transformers comics. I loved the Star Wars comics, and I bought a few Trek comics. I bought more of the next gen comics, but yeah, no thanks. It's that's really nice of you to say, and it's really been a labor of love. We all care deeply about Star Trek and want to do the best we can.
Let's go back to when you were a kid. Where were you born? When did you start? How did you get into comics, and how did you get into Star Trek?
Yeah, my origin story.
Your origin story.
I was born in Seattle. I kind of moved around a little bit as a kid. Lived in Seattle. Really got into comics in Memphis, Tennessee. I had a great third grade teacher who her husband had given her a stack of comics for the kids to read, and she put them in the back of the classroom. And when you were done with your in-class work, you were allowed to go back and get a comic to read at your desk. And I remember picking up Uncanny X-Men 139, which had the Wendigo on the cover. And I'd read plenty of comics before that. I was a big Richie Rich and Hot Stuff fan. I loved Asterix and Tintin, but my introduction to sort of mainstream American comics was that X-Men issue. And then it just developed from there. Went to high school in Chicago. went to college at Stanford and graduated wanting to draw comics, actually. I think a lot of comics writers are failed comics artists. And I gave it a whack, but you have to be very good, very fast to be a working comic book writer. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to move to Hollywood. I like movies. We'll see what happens. And I worked in the Hollywood trenches for a while, eventually serendipitously working for Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci when they were writing the first Star Trek movie for JJ. And at the same time, a friend of mine, Michael Green, had started writing comics for DC, and he asked me to join him there. And we worked on Superman, the old Superman Batman series.
Wait,
And
Michael Green, the writer of Blade Runner 2049?
That's right. Same guy.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
He's a very talented fellow. Yeah, so I remember going into Kurtzman and Orci and saying, hey, guys, I have this opportunity to write comics on the side. Is that cool with you? And they were like, are you an idiot? Of course it's cool with us. Do it. And they were the best and still are. And the thought came up, why don't we do a prequel comic for the Star Trek movie? And they looked at me and said, Johnson, get to work. And I worked on it with Tim Jones, another employee of Alex and Bob's. And Alex and Bob were very involved in the story. The story of Countdown was very much came out of, especially Bob, who was the real Trek fanatic and a TNG fan, really wanted to have some connective tissue between the Prime universe at the time that Nimoy Spock leaves to chase Nero. He wanted some connective tissue between the Prime universe and what we see at the opening of the movie. And I think that's what fans really responded to and enjoyed, was seeing that the new movie, and I think this is the genius part of the new movie, is that it wasn't a pure reboot. It wasn't saying nothing mattered before now and we're just going to start over. It was really tied to the old timeline. And I think that showed fans that it was a sign of respect to fans and to the franchise, that it was all part of one story.
So I want to get into the minutiae of how it progressed into Discovery, but especially around when the Kelvin timeline started, how far out did you know the plot of the movie, and how long did you have to keep everything under wraps while you were working on this?
For the first movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I remember I started working there at the end of 2006. The movie came out in 2009. And I remember reading the treatment for the movie at the end of 2006. So they had written Transformers, which was in production, in post-production actually. And then the treatment that I read was called Same Ship, Different Day, which is a very Alex and Bob title. Obviously was not going to be the title of the movie, but yeah, that was the working title. And it was a little different. Well, the core skeleton of the story was there. Nero was different. Nero was less of a sort of tragic figure, and he was more, as per his namesake, he was more of a kind of evil, slimy guy, not the sort of tragic family man bent for revenge that we know from the movie. But yeah, the elements were there, and then there was the casting process, which was fascinating. I was a observer of that. I wasn't involved in that, but it was definitely interesting to see. And I think I like to say JJ's a brilliant writer, brilliant director, but his really special skill that is unmatched, I think, is casting. He just casts so well, and with his casting team. But JJ's got this eye for character and actor and the best match. I mean, you go back to Alias, you look at Lost, you look at our Trek crew, you look at the new Star Wars characters.
Mission Impossible also, right?
Yeah, Mission Impossible, another one. And he's just got this great eye, and I just can't imagine a different group of actors to play these new incarnations of the Trek characters. Did I answer your question? Yeah. So I was looking at you were asking how long it advanced. So it was a couple years. So we had some runway to get Countdown done, which you don't always have with a prequel comic or any kind of prequel thing for a movie. Like it's really nice to have some runway in front of you so that you're ready and you can time it to come out at the right time.
Yes, you did answer my question. And going into once Countdown came out, how did that turn into a regular series? When did that happen?
That happened a couple years later. So 2009, and then 20. Actually, the regular ongoing series started in 2011, so it was before Into Darkness. It started because Countdown did really well, and there wasn't an ongoing Star Trek series at that time. And by that time, Bob had fired me. He basically said, "You need to just go write all the time. So I'm firing you to go write all the time." And he said, "We're going to start by doing an ongoing Star Trek comic that he would oversee, that I would write." So that was 2011 is when we started the ongoing series, and that's when I left to write full time. And then about a year into that series, maybe 2 years, Star Trek Into Darkness was going to come out. So we did the 4-issue Countdown to Darkness, and that was interesting because, unlike the first movie, we couldn't reveal anything that was going to happen in the movie. So we had to create kind of an original story that touched on themes, but we couldn't really like the way we showed Nero in the prequel comic, we couldn't show Khan in the prequel comic. Anyway, but in the meantime, the ongoing series was ongoing, and that lasted 5 years. And then, in comics right now, I'm sure there aren't a lot of series that go longer than, even 25 or 30 issues now, because financially for the publishers, they get a better return on restarting with an issue number one. And it's almost
because
like
they can make that income over on trades once it's
exactly
out and done.
Yeah. And I think what used to be story arcs within an ongoing series have become series in their own right. So if there's a particular story arc, they'll just go ahead and start over with a new number one. And there's something to be said. I mean, you do see attrition. We were really lucky in our sales. We had our core group of fans that kept the book going. But even then, it just felt right. It felt like the time was right to wrap up the ongoing series and then start what became Boldly Go. So and in between, we were able to do really fun series like the Starfleet Academy series that I co-wrote with Ryan Parrott, and the Star Trek Green Lantern, and a mini series called Manifest Destiny that Ryan and I wrote that was actually filling the slot of what the Star Trek Beyond prequel comic would have been. That was another movie where we couldn't show Idris Elba's character in a prequel comic, so we sort of had to just come up with a story. And Ryan and I looked at each other and said, "Let's just write a big Klingon battle comic." So that was fun.
I'm not just saying this because you're here, but Star Trek Green Lantern is my favorite crossover of all time. It's from everything I've read so far.
Thank you so much. It's one of my favorite things that I ever got to work on. It was such a blast, and thanks to DC and to IDW and my brilliant editor, Sarah Gatos, and Jim Chadwick at DC. The companies, I think, embraced the fun of it, and they didn't get too serious about, these things can never happen. I think crossovers work when you have two franchises that do have some similarity. Even something as crazy as the Batman Elmer Fudd thing that they did. There's something intrinsically funny about it, and I think if you have a nugget of something interesting or entertaining, you can then build it out. And then, I'm hoping we get to do one more. I planned for a trilogy, so we'll see what happens.
I remember that Justice League / DC Universe extended ending, wherein we landed up with hopefully getting everyone. But I was talking to Chase at STLE, Chase Moritz. And he was saying he's also very interested in seeing that. So I hope we do see that at some point. But going back to what you're talking about, getting that nugget of something interesting, correct me if I'm wrong, but for you, one of those nuggets for that crossover was the similarity between Hal Jordan and Kirk, right? Maybe?
Yeah, I think I kind of, so often you see when two characters meet, they have to fight before they become friends. And I thought, rather than just doing the usual thing, these two guys would pretty quickly see each other as on the same team in terms of good versus evil. So they wouldn't necessarily fight each other and then have to team up. It's more like they would see that they're on the same team, but then they would their differences would come out, and they're both really headstrong kind of alpha males, and you would see them bounce against each other a little bit, not fighting, but just you'd see their different attitudes play out as the adventure progressed. So, Kirk, for all his risk taking and rule breaking, is still essentially a military officer, and Hal also has a military background, but he's suddenly has the freedom and power of being a ring bearer. Although I guess you'd say he's also still in a kind of regimented situation, given that he's a member of the Green Lantern Corps. But just seeing, I think there's a bit of Kirk that was jealous that Hal could just, fly wherever he wants, zip in and out. The fact that even though Hal worked within a group and worked within a corps, Hal also had a little bit more freedom than Kirk does. But no, that was fun. So I wanted to flip the trope of we're enemies and then we're friends, and just play it a little differently for these two.
And now I know we're getting close to how much time we have. I know we have a little more than half left, but I do want to get to Light of Kalis and Succession.
Yes.
Just one final question before we get there. People who listen to our show know that I share a controversial opinion, much like you do, if I remember correctly from STLV. We both consider Into Darkness our favorite Kelvin film. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm a defender of it. My favorite's probably 2009, just because it's the first. It's the one I was closest to in production. But I'm a big fan of Into Darkness, absolutely, and I think it's funnier than people remember. I think the performances are incredible across the board, especially Chris Pine, who I think is the most underrated of the cast. I think he had the most difficult job, and I think he did it amazingly well. And I think people maybe got a little bit too hung up on the idea of flipping the sacrifice and death at the end compared to Wrath of Khan. So I think Into Darkness holds up remarkably well. And I think the plot, it's an intricate plot. There's a lot going on, and I think I'm biased, obviously, but I thought the writers did a great job, and I thought JJ did a great job of having it all work. It's a big movie, but I just think it's really interesting compared to Star Trek Beyond, which I love. But is Star Trek Beyond more of kind of a straightforward romp? It's more sort of a bottle episode. But I just think they're all fantastic.
All right. Well, I'm glad we have that on record, so people don't think I'm ridiculous for defending that movie.
Not at all. Into Darkness. I'm a fan. I'm a big fan.
Your favorite Kirk quote is also from Into Darkness, right?
My favorite what?
Your favorite Captain Kirk quote. I remember
my favorite Captain Kirk quote. Yes, is I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I only know what I can do.
Yeah,
it's my favorite. I think that sums Kirk up in a nutshell. And the way Chris Pine delivers that with a certain desperation and a certain vulnerability there, that I think really expands and gets underneath the skin of Kirk, who is sort of traditionally like everything bounces off him. But that might be my favorite moment in the movies, actually, when he's standing there with Spock and he's just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I only know what I can do. Yeah. Thanks for calling that out. I love that one.
No, I'm happy to. I love that movie. No, let's get into the Light of Kalis and Succession. Yeah. Light of Kalis came out first, right? For the record?
Yeah, that was the first one. We wanted to do some Klingon backstory. Even though T'Kuvma is only in the show for the first 2 episodes, his shadow looms over everything and continues to underscore particularly L'Rell's journey. She becomes essentially the leader of the Klingons by the end of season 1. Spoiler alert, by the way. So it was fun. It was really cool to tell a story that didn't have any humans in it too. That was just pure Klingon. So that was great. Working with Kirsten Beyer, who's a writer on the show, and coming up with something that I feel like was a little surprising. It wasn't your typical prequel. And then we did our annual, which was our one shot about Lieutenant Stamets and how he met Dr. Culber and the origin of the mycelial network and how they discovered it. and invented the spore drive. And then we did Succession, our 4-issue Mirror Universe story, which was just a blast. That was so much fun to write because we're sort of unshackled from the need to tie into the show too much because the show had already been to the Mirror Universe. We knew, at least for now, we weren't going back anytime soon. And the Mirror Universe is just so fun to write because it's just everybody's the greediest evil version of themselves. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, if there are good people in the Mirror Universe, but there are no rules really. Everybody's out for themselves. So that was a lot of fun, and we got a really good response.
Again, I'm not just saying this because you're here, but Light of Kalis, one of my favorite prequels.
Excellent. Can we talk every day? I love the positive feedback. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, that means
the
a lot.
epic storytelling in that, just the Jesus Christ style, the way that one figure's journey is told with very little violence. You don't notice that, but the story is a journey. There is very little actual fight in there.
You're right. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. And I love the comparison to Jesus, which is I think appropriate. And speaking as a Christian, it is a journey of what is essentially one person rallying his people against oppression. And I think, we're so used to thinking of the Klingons as just oppressors and sort of one-note conquerors. And I think this goes back to the original conception of T'Kuvma from Brian Fuller and Alex Kurtzman, is that he wasn't going to be, that genius opening of the entire show where this voice is talking about this irresistible force that's coming to take everyone and control them and assimilate them. And it's T'Kuvma talking about the Federation. That was just such a genius move. So, yeah, I'm glad to hear you. I really like your analogy there.
It definitely also takes the structure of a very typical myth story where a character central to the larger part of the story is facing doubt and is at the end of his road, and another character tells him, "Hey, sit down, let me tell you the story of our ancestor." And then that's what the story takes place over. Is at the end of this, you see how Vogue changes within the story as he listens to T'Kuvma's journey. And it's everything about the book. I liked it so much. I bought the single issues and I pre-ordered the trade. I have it in front of me right now. Have you gone to see the trade yet? Did you get
I have. I thought they did a great job.
It is beautiful. Special
shout out to Tony Shasteen, my fantastic genius partner on most of the Star Trek books I've written, who had an enormous task with bringing the incredible detail of the Discovery Klingons to life. And he just did such an incredible job. And I feel like for an epic story, you need an artist who can do epic work. And Tony is that. So it's really special to have the first Discovery trade be work I did with Tony and with Sarah Gatos, my longtime editor of the Trek books, who is no longer with IDW. She's moved on to Oni Press, but it was nice to have Sarah be the editor of that first collection. Well, and thank you for getting the singles and the trades. We love you. That's how we stay in business. So
it's totally, I think every page is worth owning both of them in that form, because with my trade, I also got at the end, I got the variant covers, the very underrated Declan Shelby variant covers of each of the ships.
Oh my gosh, Declan's amazing. Yeah, and his wife Jordy, who does the colors for them. We were so lucky to have their work on our book, and the ships of the line, as we call them, were just fantastic.
And I want to get into Tony's art a little bit, because as good as you guys' writing is,
thank you,
his artwork is so intricate and just beautiful. It's worthy of that mid status within Trek. It seems like a Klingon episode every
cool.
page that we look at.
Yeah.
Especially there is one page, and we already covered this book, and I don't know if your interview will be in there as a supplement to that episode, or we'll probably be releasing it separately. We don't know that yet, but of the hour plus content that we got from recording over Light of Kalis and Succession, we spent 10 minutes just talking about that double spread of Boreth, the Caves of Nomad, where it's Klingon kid sitting in a volcano.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the thing. See, when you have an artist like Tony, I know that I can do something just crazy, right? Like I can write, okay, we're in a big underground lava cavern with stone pillars and kids sitting on top of them, and I can just write that spoiled and give it to Tony, and Tony turns into something beyond anything we could have imagined. And he's so amazing. And I think it's when you're doing a licensed comic and you're trying to tie into such a beautiful show, you need what's on the comics page to be as beautiful and epic as the show is, and in that way. And by the way, I need to give a shout out to J.D. Metler, who's our genius colorist too. And that scene you pointed out in the lava caves is a perfect example of how much J.D. brings so much life to the story, and you see what a great partnership he and Tony have. So, as well as our letterers at And World Design, they were incredible. I think one of the things I love about comics is how so many different disciplines come into play. But back to Tony, it's just so amazing to have a partner who can handle anything we throw at him. And the other thing is he cares so much. He doesn't try to rush through or just do the bare minimum to get the image and story across. He absolutely pours his heart and soul into every panel that he does. So, and the other challenge for Tony here was that, the show hadn't come out, and we were able to get stills from the show, but the show was still being produced. It was still in production. The episodes weren't done. So Tony had to work with not as much reference as you have, say, like when he was drawing the Kelvin comics, he had 2 movies worth of reference. But for Discovery, he really didn't have that much, simply because the show itself was being produced at that time. Anyway, very lucky to work with Tony.
Every page is beautiful. Like I said, I liked it so much. I bought it in both forms. I highly recommend it to. I think the best way to read it is make sure your season 1 playlist is ready for Discovery and read this, and then jump into episode 1.
I love it. Yeah,
you'll know
absolutely.
exactly where Takuma is coming from.
Yeah, preach it. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, that's the plan.
And after that, once you're done with season 1, jump into Discovery Succession, which is just, come on, man. How do you keep doing this? How do you keep outdoing yourself with every book that you're writing?
Because I get to, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I'm lucky because I get to work with Kirsten Beyer. And if my work's getting better, it's because I've been working with her and coming up, it's really fun. In fact, this weekend I'm working on what we hope will be our next Discovery comic, and being able to work with Kirsten on these is just a gift. So I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And what I hope as a writer is that the fun that I have writing the stories comes through in the story itself for the readers. I think readers can tell if the writer's not having fun, but I think readers can definitely tell when the writer is having fun. I was having a lot of fun with. I could do like an ongoing series just in the Succession mirror universe. Spoiler alert: there's a lot of casualties though, so I'd need to add some new characters to the roster.
I wish I had more time so I could talk to you about every Easter egg that I found in these books. Like in Light of Kalis, there is the Klingon birth scene. And there is so much there that I think I could do an hour about just trying to get out information from you on
Tony? Have you interviewed Tony yet? We should get Tony on. Yeah.
We are scheduled to talk to him in October.
Oh, good. Okay, because Tony can walk you through. Yeah, that was incredible. That was another thing where, like, with Tony, his art in that scene is storytelling itself.
Yeah.
Like, I will give him the basics of an idea, but then he'll add these details, whether it's like how the characters interact, the looks on their faces, the room that they're in, what they're holding, how they're dressed. There's so much that he adds to it that it's I feel guilty like taking credit for people might think, oh, that was written in the script, but there's a lot that's not written in the script that Tony does.
So speaking of Succession, though, with Angel Hernandez just kills it with art on that one.
Yeah, he's incredible. I'm so lucky. Angel, we worked together on the Star Trek Green Lantern series, and Angel is so good at these likenesses. And again, there's not a ton of. I mean, now he has the first series to look at, but at the time he didn't have all that much reference to look at for the characters. But he nails these references. And again, with Angel, like with Tony, I'll describe things like the Epic Throne Room or Space Battle, and Angel just takes it and runs with it and ends up creating these incredible action scenes and the beautiful Terran Empire costumes and locations, some of which is taken from reference from the show, but a lot of which is just coming straight from Angel's imagination. Just incredible. And I hope to keep working with both of these guys. Obviously, if we do another Trek Lantern, Angel's the only guy that can do it. He's the only guy I'd want to work on, just so we can bring it. His art is there for all 3 series. So
I want our listeners to go out and buy Discovery Succession. So all I'm going to say about that is the 4-issue miniseries is pretty much a musical chairs for the Mirror Universe Empire Throne. That's what the story is.
I like
so
that.
many
That's
surprises.
a good way to put it. Yeah.
And there is the finale, the last page gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say. There is
fun.
such a. It's all just a slow zoom into a ship, and it's just, oh my God.
I was glad that they let us do that, actually. That's great. Yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
But before I get into because I want to also know what your tastes are as a Trek fan. Just a couple of final questions on this, though.
Sure.
With Discovery Succession, one thing I noticed is that while the book has so many big bang scenes with explosions and epic fights and people cutting each other's throats, the books really shine in quiet moments. For our listeners, there is a comic book term called moment-to-moment transition, which literally shows what happened from second to second. And there are these few fixed frame panels, Mike, I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about, where there is for example, the first one we see is with Ariam, and she's just walking up to a chair.
Yes.
And just the way, one of the places where the books really shine is those really quiet, silent moments where you just see that beat from one second to another.
That's so great to hear.
Where was the inspiration from that, and what made you lean into some of those silent moments while giving us, the really big fights?
Well, I'm a big fan of letting the art do the talking. This goes back, one of my favorite comics ever is the original Marvel G.I. Joe number 21, and I think comics fans will know the one I'm talking about, called Silent Interlude, which is it's just a one-shot story of Snake Eyes breaking into a Cobra castle to rescue Scarlet from Storm Shadow. It's all silent. It's a completely silent issue, and I just fell in love with that. And even though I'm a writer, I love writing quote unquote pages where you're just letting the art tell the story, and Angel's so good at that. So I do try to put those moments in, and it's easy when you have great artists like I've been able to work with. So I consciously do try to put in silent panels sometimes because that's comics, right? Everybody should read Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, which is just not only super instructive, but it's a great comic book in its own right, and it just delves into the sort of secrets of comics, like you were describing, the moment to moment transitions that make comics great. So yeah, I'm really glad that those kind of moments resonate for you, because it's definitely a conscious decision on our part.
Again, another 10 on 10, highly recommended. As soon as you finish your Discovery Season 1 watch, jump into Succession. That's the best. I like that you both wrote the bookends to Season 1.
Yeah, that was
keep
cool.
getting that.
Yeah,
I hope we keep getting that until Discovery keeps going. And
there won't be. I don't think we're going to have a prequel to the second season, but we will have a story coming out during the second season that I think fans will enjoy. But thank you. That's fantastic to hear.
So I know we're done with Discovery for now. But I do know the 26th cannot get here soon enough because Trek versus Transformers starts.
Yes. It's that's enormous fun. Again, I think two franchises that work very well together. And gosh, I can't wait for fans to see it. I'm having a blast writing it with John Barber, and Phil Murphy is doing an incredible job on the art. It's basically like the lost animated show that we never got to see. So yeah, it's super fun, and I can't wait for people to see it.
Mike, I've told you over and over how big a fan I am of yours, but if there is not one scene in which Kirk punches a Transformer, I'm going to be so mad, man.
Yeah, there's what can I say without spoiling it? Yeah, there's I think there'll be a lot that'll make fans happy. Yeah, definitely. I should come back on. I'm happy to come back on after it comes out, and we'll go through it.
Oh, great. I'm glad we can lock down a future interview with you. I'm more than happy to. I would actually like to do like a 2-hour deep dive with you on your writing process, because that's something I'm always wanted to pick your brain on. But,
yeah, that would be fun.
Speaking about your future projects, you alluded to it earlier, but is it safe to say one of your next Discovery comics will start with that last page of Succession?
Not for sure yet.
Oh, man.
But I would love to, if we can get back to the Mirror Universe. That is sort of where I was setting up where things could continue from there. So fingers crossed, positive vibes that we'll get there and get to do that, because and it really depends on unfortunately, our capitalist society depends on how well the other books do. But hopefully we'll get to do more. We've had a really good response so far.
Apart from Trek versus Transformers, is there anything you can tell us about your future projects related to Trek? Do you have a story in Waypoint?
No, I've stuck to Kelvin and Discovery, but people should definitely pick up Waypoint. It's such a great comic and a great idea that Sarah Katos introduced. So definitely pick up Waypoint. And for Trek, I'm really focusing on what Discovery right now. Although there are a couple projects that might not be comics that I can talk about in a few months. So I'll just leave you with that.
I know we've got a little bit of time left with you, so I will just jump into our final Trek nerd questions that most of us would love to know more about when it comes to your Trek fandom. But what's your favorite Star Trek series?
It's Next Generation. I was a Next Generation baby. I mean, I was 13, 14 when TNG premiered, and I remember my family didn't want to watch it on like the big living room TV, so I had to go upstairs where we had like a tiny little black and white thing, and I watched Encounter at Farpoint there, and that was my. I'd been a fan of Star Trek for sure, and I'd seen the first 4 movies in the theater on opening weekend, but I wasn't around when TOS was originally on the air, so TNG was my first experience of just weekly watching Trek. So yeah, I'm a TNG baby. Picard is my captain, and I'm excited we're going to get to see him again.
Speaking of captains, I'm assuming he's also your favorite captain now.
He is.
So is your favorite Trek episode or movie also one with Picard spearheading it?
My favorite, actually. Well, that's hard. I don't really have a favorite movie because there's a lot of them, but I think my favorite Trek character is Data, and my favorite Trek episode is Measure of a Man, which obviously for Data fans is a key episode, but that's my favorite one, and I think the character of Data just combines a lot of aspects that make Trek great. The inherent drama of an android wanting to become more human, the humor that goes along with that, the metaphysical questions about what makes a life form, and there's just so much surrounding that character that I love, and then it's just portrayed so amazingly by Brent Spiner. So Data's my favorite, but my favorite captain is Sir Jean-Luc. So
there is fan fiction that I've written for myself with that episode, except it's taking place in a real world court, and it's about an immigrant wanting to be American.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. the plot structure translates so well of Measure of a Man. Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but Ted 2, that the movie that came out, the sequel to Ted,
Yeah.
is pretty much a liftoff of Measure of a Man.
I never thought of it that way, but I'm going to have to go back and watch it again. It totally is. It's Measure of a Bear.
Yeah, apparently Seth MacFarlane was out of ideas, and he was watching Measure of a Man, and he said, "You know what? I'm gonna make this as my next movie." But
fantastic! I love it.
And before we get out of here, do you have a favorite Star Trek quote that you always go back to? Is it your Captain Kirk quote?
Oh, my favorite Star Trek quote. I think my favorite Star Trek quote is actually not from the show itself, but it's from Gene Roddenberry, and I can't quote it. I should be able to, but it's a long quote off the top of my head. But it's essentially that humanity's not going to advance until we start taking delight in each other's differences instead of attacking each other for them. That's my favorite quote, which just sums it up. Which is, until we take delight in differences and variety, which is what Star Trek is all about. It's literally about going out to find more differences, to find new species we haven't met, and to learn and enjoy the differences that we have with them. So Star Trek is the mission statement of Star Trek is not just to celebrate diversity, but to expand it and find more. So I think that's an important lesson for us right now.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. I will make you a deal. As long as you keep writing comics so much and having fun with them, I will buy those single issues. I will buy those trades. I will buy those Kindle issues. I don't care about eating outside. I don't care about eating as long as I can have these.
Well,
comics.
Take care of yourself so you can keep buying the comics. But seriously, thank you so much for your support. And I really mean it when I say that we would not be able to make the comics unless you and our readers were out there supporting them. That's what enables us. So to all the fans listening, these exist because of you. And it's something that we all, in that way, you've contributed to their creation. So thank you, and we'll keep doing it.
Where can people get in touch with you if they want to?
I'm usually in my writing cave, unreachable, but please feel free to reach out on Twitter. I'm on Twitter sporadically, just for my own sanity. But feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you have. And in the meantime, I will just say LLAP.
Just before we go, I believe on Twitter, your handle is Mike_comics with an X.
Yeah, it's actually just Mike Comics. It's MikeComix. Yeah, it's a nod to Asterix because I'm a huge Asterix fan. And it doesn't even really make sense as a name for Asterix, but I just thought it's short. It has comics and my name in it. So there you go.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. And
thank you so much.
Sir.
It was a really great conversation, and I look forward to the next time.
I will leave you now to your book.
That is all I ask.